1972, a chartered plane carrying a rugby team just vanished over the Andes Mountains. The whole world pretty much wrote it off as a horrible tragedy with no survivors. A story that really should have ended right there, in the snow. But what happened next, over 72 absolutely agonizing days, is one of the most incredible and frankly harrowing survival stories ever told.
So the official story was simple. A tragic accident, 0 survivors. For 8 days, search planes flew back and forth across these vast, empty peaks, but they found absolutely nothing. So the search was called off. The world moved on. But thousands of feet up, in that frozen silence, a story of almost unbelievable endurance was really just getting started.
You know, it all started with a fatal miscalculation. It was October 13th, 1972, and the pilots of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, well, they thought they had already cleared the Andes Mountains. They actually started their descent toward Chile. They were disastrously wrong.
What happened next was just terrifyingly fast. The plane basically dropped out of the clouds and flew straight into a mountain. The first impact tore the tail section clean off, actually sucking passengers out into the empty air. The rest of the plane, the fuselage, it became this makeshift toboggan, just rocketing down a glacier before finally slamming to a stop.
And here's the first real miracle of the Andes. Of the 45 people who were on that plane, an incredible 33 survived the crash itself. But you can imagine their relief was short-lived. I mean, they were stranded at over 11,000 feet, surrounded by the dead and the dying, dealing with horrific injuries, freezing temperatures, and they had no idea where on earth they were.
So, in those first few days, they really clung to the hope of a quick rescue. They could even see the search planes flying high above them. But here's the problem. Their white plane was perfectly camouflaged against the white snow. To the pilots, they were just invisible. And as the days stretched into a week, that hope started to fade, and it was replaced by a much more urgent crisis: starvation.
Okay, look at this. This was their entire food supply. A few chocolate bars, a little jam, some wine, and candy. And this had to be shared among dozens of survivors. The rationing was just brutal. One survivor, Nando Pardido, he made a single chocolate-covered peanut last for 3 whole days. But you know, that was just delaying the inevitable.
And then came the final blow. On the 11th day, they managed to rig a small radio to work. And through all the static, they heard the news: the search for their plane had been officially called off. The world had given them up for dead. And at that exact moment, their very last scraps of food were gone.
Seriously, just try to put yourself in their shoes for a second. There are no plants, there are no animals. Rescue is not coming. There's nothing but snow, wreckage, and the bodies of your friends, frozen all around you. What do you do?
Well, faced with this impossible reality, the survivors started to debate. It was an agonizing conversation, one that forced them to confront one of society's deepest and most profound taboos.
The choice really wasn't between right and wrong anymore. Not up there. It was a brutal, simple calculation. On one side, certain, slow death from starvation. And on the other, a chance, a slim chance to live, but one that required doing the unthinkable.
You know, the words of the survivors themselves really explain the grim logic that they were forced to accept. They actually made a pact with each other. If any of them were to die, the others had permission to use their bodies to survive. It was a heart-wrenching decision made from a desperate, powerful will to see their families again. But this story is about so much more than that one terrible choice. It's also a stunning testament to human ingenuity. I mean, these were mostly young guys from the coast of Uruguay. Many of them had never even seen snow before. And yet, when they were faced with an environment that should have killed them in days, they adapted and innovated in these really remarkable ways.
Take water, for instance. You might think, oh, just eat the snow, right? Well, that was actually too dangerous. It would lower their core body temperature. So they came up with this simple but brilliant system, using a salvaged piece of metal as a kind of solar panel to melt snow into fresh drinking water. It was a lifeline they literally engineered from scrap. They also had to fight these hidden dangers, like snow blindness. The intense UV glare off the snow could literally blind them. And with only 3 pairs of sunglasses for the entire group, they had to improvise. They crafted these makeshift visors out of the plastic cabin lining just to protect their eyesight. Every single day brought a new problem they had to solve to stay alive. But their ordeal, it wasn't over. On their 17th night, a deadly avalanche buried the fuselage as they slept inside, killing 8 more people. After more than 2 months, the survivors knew that just waiting was a death sentence. They had to save themselves. The plan was as desperate as it was heroic. 2 of the strongest would try to walk west to find help.
Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa were the 2 chosen for the trek. They had no maps, no compass, no proper climbing gear. They were wearing layers of sweaters and jeans, and they used the airplane's seat cushions as makeshift snowshoes. For 10 brutal days, they hiked 61 kilometers over the treacherous spine of the Andes Mountains.
Near total exhaustion, they finally reached a river and spotted a farmer on the far bank. The water was roaring too loudly to shout over, so the farmer threw a rock across with a piece of paper and a pencil tied to it. This is the note Parado wrote and threw back. It was the very first message to the outside world, the first proof that anyone at all had survived.
And that note, it set the rescue in motion. In total, the survivors had endured 72 days. That's over 2 months of starvation, of freezing cold, of avalanches, and the constant presence of death. On December 22, 1972, helicopters, guided by Parado, finally reached the crash site. Of the original 45 people who boarded that flight, only 16 were left alive. They had survived the impossible.
The miracle of the Andes is such a harrowing story, but it's also a profoundly human one. It forces all of us to ask, what are we truly capable of when everything is stripped away? It shows that even when the entire world has given up on you, the will to live can push us to do both the unthinkable and the absolutely extraordinary.